For decades, Robert Downey Jr. was the man who could do no wrong, a charming genius with talent that seemed limitless. From his early rise in Hollywood's golden spotlight to his rebirth as Iron Man, he became more than just a movie star. He became a symbol of redemption, but behind the billion-dollar success and the easy smile lies a life story that few truly understand. One marked by pain, loss, and a lifelong battle to stay alive. Before he was Tony Stark, before he was the face of Marvel's empire, Robert Downey Jr. was a boy born into chaos. He grew up surrounded by fame, addiction, and heartbreak before he even understood what those words meant. His life was destined for greatness and destruction in equal measure. Now, at 60, Robert Downey Jr. finally opens up about the years that nearly destroyed him, the people who saved him, and the haunting truth behind his extraordinary comeback. This isn't the story of a superhero. It's the story of a man who had to fight his demons in the dark, and somehow find the strength to step back into the light. Before Robert Downey Jr. became one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, he was a child lost in the shadows of fame. His story doesn't begin with red carpets or flashing cameras. It begins in the haze of 1970s New York, inside a home where art and addiction lived side by side. Robert was born into a world most kids never see. His father, Robert Downey Sr., was a bold, rebellious filmmaker who broke all the rules. His mother, Elsie, was an actress with dreams as big as her heart. Together, they created an environment overflowing with creativity, but also chaos. Drugs, parties, and late-night scripts were all part of normal life. For young Robert, it was just the world he knew. He would later describe his childhood as beautiful and terrifying. At just 6 years old, he appeared in one of his father's underground films. Cameras, smoke, and noise surrounded him. But what he remembers most isn't the fame, it's the feeling of being adrift. Unsure where childhood ended and performance began. By the time he was 8, he had already seen more of Hollywood's underbelly than most adults ever would. His father, though loving in his own way, struggled with addiction. He introduced Robert to drugs at an age when most kids were still playing with toys. It wasn't intentional cruelty. It was a broken kind of bonding. In his father's world, freedom meant no rules. But that freedom came with a cost. Robert once said, "When your dad gives you drugs, you learn very early that love and pain can come in the same package." That painful truth would follow him for decades. As a teenager, Robert moved to Los Angeles, chasing his dream of acting. His parents had divorced, and he bounced between homes, schools, and dreams, searching for something solid. But Hollywood wasn't built for stability. It rewarded his talent and charisma, but it also magnified his weaknesses. By the mid-1980s, Robert was becoming a rising star. Films like Weird Science and Less Than Zero showcased his natural brilliance. He wasn't acting. He was channeling something raw, something too real. His portrayal of a young addict in Less Than Zero was hauntingly authentic, because he wasn't pretending. He was living it. Behind the scenes, his life mirrored the characters he played. The parties got wilder, the nights longer, and the lines between performance and reality disappeared. Hollywood loved his brilliance, but it didn't care about his pain. Every award nomination, every headline, came with a hidden cost, a deeper fall into the world he was trying to escape. His friends called him magnetic, unpredictable, and fragile. Casting directors called him a genius, but those closest to him saw the truth. A young man drowning in expectation, still trying to understand what normal felt like. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't chasing fame. He was running from emptiness. Every movie, every performance, was an attempt to fill a void that started in childhood. And as the world began to celebrate him as one of Hollywood's brightest stars, the cracks beneath that success were starting to widen. The little boy who had grown up surrounded by chaos was still there. Only now, he had an audience watching every step of his fall. By the early 1990s, Robert Downey Jr. was living every actor's dream and nightmare. On screen, he was unstoppable. Critics called him a prodigy, capable of turning every role into gold. Off-screen, he was falling apart. What had started as casual indulgence had become a full-blown war with addiction. one that would soon consume his career, his freedom, and nearly his life. Hollywood loved his unpredictability until it couldn't handle it anymore. While others saw his charm, insiders saw the chaos behind the scenes. He'd show up late, disappear for days, or arrive on set exhausted and disoriented. But when the cameras rolled, magic happened. He could still deliver brilliance on command, and for a while, that brilliance protected him. Then came Chaplin in 1992, the performance that proved his genius beyond doubt. His portrayal of Charlie Chaplin earned him an Academy Award nomination and universal praise. But while the world saw a young star at his peak, Robert was already slipping over the edge. Fame had only magnified his inner emptiness. After Chaplin, the spiral accelerated. He was arrested multiple times for drug possession, often found asleep behind the wheel or wandering the streets. Each mugshot told the same story, a man with extraordinary talent trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. The headlines were merciless. Hollywood turned its back. Studio doors that had once been wide open now closed without hesitation. In 1999, after multiple violations of probation, the court finally lost patience. Robert Downey Jr. was sentenced to state prison. The man who once walked red carpets now sat in a cold cell, surrounded by silence, stripped of fame, fortune, and freedom. He later described that time as both the lowest and most necessary point of his life. "You can't imagine how deep you have to go," he said, "before you stop digging." In that cell, he faced what he had been running from since childhood, himself. But even in that darkness, there were glimmers of clarity. He began to understand that addiction wasn't just a habit, it was a way of hiding from pain. From the instability of his youth, from the pressure to always perform, from the guilt of disappointing everyone who believed in him. When he was finally released, the world didn't welcome him back with open arms. He had to start over from nothing. No studio wanted to insure him. No producer wanted to risk a relapse. Friends who once called him family had vanished. He was a ghost in the industry he helped define. But somewhere inside, the fight hadn't died. Beneath the exhaustion and regret, Robert still believed he could find redemption. He knew it wouldn't come through fame, but through change, real, lasting change. And that change began not on a film set, but in silence. Away from cameras, away from applause, learning again how to live one day at a time, he had lost everything. But for the first time in decades, he was free to rebuild after years of chaos. Robert Downey Jr. was a man the world had written off. He'd been to prison, rehab, and rock bottom more times than anyone could count. The headlines had stopped mocking him. They had simply stopped caring. But what no one realized was that in silence, he was preparing for the greatest comeback in Hollywood history. The turning point came quietly. In 2003, on a film set most people have forgotten, Gothica. It wasn't the movie that changed his life. It was someone who walked into it, a young producer named Susan Levin. She was calm, grounded, and completely immune to his charm. Where others saw a legend, she saw a man who still hadn't healed. Robert fell for her instantly. But Susan made one thing clear. She wouldn't be part of his life until he got clean. It wasn't a threat. It was a truth. For the first time, Robert realized that love wasn't about saving someone. It was about standing still until they saved themselves. That realization changed everything. He entered recovery not for fame, not for work, but for love, for the chance to live a life that mattered. He found therapy, faith, and discipline in small daily routines. Meditation replaced intoxication. Simplicity replaced chaos. He began running, reading, praying, and rebuilding the parts of himself that fame had shattered. By 2005, a miracle had happened. Robert Downey Jr. was sober. Not temporarily, completely. And for the first time since childhood, he felt clarity. The man who had once been Hollywood's cautionary tale was becoming its redemption story. Then came the call that would change everything. In 2007, Marvel Studios, still a small studio at the time, was searching for the perfect actor to play Tony Stark. The irony was poetic. They needed someone who understood genius, arrogance, and redemption. Jon Favreau, the director, fought for Robert. The studio hesitated. They feared his past would ruin the film. But Favreau insisted, "Robert is Tony Stark. You can't fake that kind of truth." And he was right. When Iron Man hit theaters in 2008, it wasn't just a movie premiere. It was a resurrection. The audience didn't see a character. They saw a man who had lived the pain behind the mask. The wit, the confidence, the broken heart beneath the armor. It was all real. The world cheered for Tony Stark, but in truth, they were cheering for Robert Downey Jr. His comeback redefined Hollywood. He went from being uninsurable to leading the most successful film franchise in history. But unlike before, fame no longer controlled him. He protected his peace, his sobriety, and his family. Robert once said, "Job 1 is getting out of that cave." Many of us do. Job 2 is walking out into the light and learning to live there. He had done both. Beside him through it all was Susan, now his wife and creative partner, and their children, who became his anchor. Together they built a life that wasn't about fame but balance. The redemption of Robert Downey Jr. wasn't scripted in Hollywood. It was written in real life, one small, quiet choice at a time. To heal, to forgive, and to begin again. And while the world saw Iron Man rise, the real victory was something no camera could capture, the peace of a man who finally forgave himself. At 60 years old, Robert Downey Jr. stands as one of the most beloved figures in Hollywood, not just because of his talent, but because of what he represents. His story isn't about superheroes or box office records. It's about survival, forgiveness, and the courage to rebuild when the world has already decided your story is over. When people see him now, smiling on red carpets, mentoring young actors, living peacefully with his family, it's easy to forget how far he's come. But Robert never forgets. Every scar, every mistake, every dark night is part of who he is. He doesn't hide it anymore. He carries it like armor, not to protect himself,
but to remind others that healing is possible. He often says,
"I don't drink these days because I don't want to miss anything." It's a simple line, but it carries the weight of a lifetime. For a man who once lived in chaos, being present is the greatest gift of all. Robert's view of fame has changed completely. He no longer sees it as a reward. He sees it as a responsibility. He knows the power of influence, the way his story can reach someone who's struggling to find their way out. That's why he talks openly about recovery, self-worth, and faith. Not to inspire headlines, but to inspire hope. Behind the scenes, Robert has become more than an actor. He's a creator, an advocate, and a voice for compassion in an industry that often forgets what matters. He produces films that tell human stories, supports environmental causes, and uses his success to lift others rather than elevate himself. But when he reflects on his life, the thing he talks about most isn't Iron Man or fame. It's peace, the quiet, steady kind that only comes from self-acceptance. He knows he can't erase the past, and he doesn't want to. The man who once lived in the darkness understands now that redemption isn't about being perfect. It's about staying honest. He once said, "You can't change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." That's the truth that defines Robert Downey Jr. today. He changed his ending, not by chance, but by choice. When the cameras stop rolling and the world moves on, Robert will be remembered not just as Tony Stark, not just as a movie legend, but as proof that no fall is final. His journey stands as a mirror for everyone who's ever felt broken, reminding them that strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from standing back up. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of his story. Not the fame, not the money, but the man behind it all, a man who faced his demons and turned them into purpose. As he celebrates 60 years of life, Robert Downey Jr. doesn't look back in regret. He looks forward in gratitude. His greatest role isn't Iron Man, it's Robert himself. A man who learned that sometimes the hero we're searching for is the one we become after surviving the storm.